Hi everyone, welcome to week 4. We'll continue to talk about ideologies. Last week we covered classical ideologies or conventional ideologies, and this week we'll focus more about ideologies that are challenging those classical ideologies. So today I will try to give you some information about 4 different things. First of all, we'll start with the discussion of end of ideology or history. We'll come to that in detail in a second. Second, liberal democracy versus the rest of the ideologies. So basically, we'll talk about in historical context whether the collapse of the Soviet Union represented the triumph of the liberal democracy or not. And then third, we'll talk about radicalism and ideologies that are, again, challenging the liberal democracy especially. And finally, we'll talk about populism, which is, I think, the most recent challenge coming against the democratic systems in the Western world, also in the other countries in the South and in the East. So let's start talk about whether the ideology is finished. So basically this thesis was defended by Daniel Bell and Francis Fukuyama, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union. They put forward this interesting idea that actually liberal democracy won the competition over the communism. And because of that, the world is going to be under the perfect control of the liberal democracy, with the U.S. hegemony, of course, being U.S. is the most powerful imperial power that will control the whole world. And then Fukuyama wrote his book, The End of History, and then, of course, some other authors and scholars challenge him. And basically, when you think about the human history after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I think we have so many reasons to say that Francis Fukuyama and Daniel Bell were wrong about their claim that the collapse of the Soviet Union is at the same time the end of ideology. There are so many other ideologies came into existence as a challenge to liberal democracy. This is why even we refer so many times to the concept radical when we start talking about some of those challenges. So radical is a kind of style of politics that frequently returns to one's ideologies, theoretical first principles in seeking solutions to all sorts of problems. So it's almost like using your religious book to answer all of the problems that you face in the modern world. And of course, you can relate to those problems if you only stick to one single doctrine and try to answer everything from one perspective is not necessarily always a good idea. And number one, I can talk about Islamic fundamentalism or Islam as a political challenge against liberal democracy. So Islam appears in the South as the only major alternative to capitalism and democracy, especially with the Arab Spring in the Middle Eastern countries. We saw the electoral success and popular success of Islamist movements in Egypt, in Tunisia, in other countries as well. So what was so special about Islamism? So that question is a hard question, but basically throughout the authoritarian regimes that these countries or these societies were under the control of these very authoritarian systems and regimes, while over decades actually Islamists developed very close relations with the people. They provided service, they provided so many other goods to the people, and because of that, actually, in the eye of the people in this region, Islamists got the kind of upper hand, and they had a very good reputation in the eyes of the people. But of course, we also saw that after they came to power, they really had difficult time to deliver most of the things they promised to deliver. And because of that, for instance, I think biggest example is Egypt. Because of the military coup, they went back to authoritarian regime again. So basically, Islamism, even though it put some important promises as a challenge to liberal democracies, when Islamists came to power, they do not necessarily manage to construct their own version of democracy. I think I can give Turkey as a good example to that as well. And believe or not, in many survey questions that I asked in Turkey, in Egypt and in Tunisia, actually, people in these countries really want to have a democratic system. They want to live in dignity, but at the same time, the version of the democracy they want is not necessarily represented by the liberal democracy. So this is why I think it is reasonable to talk about different versions of democracies. I'm losing so much time. Maybe we can talk more in detail tomorrow. But second one I want to talk about is environmentalism, or ecology as a political radicalism. So ecology is a science that studies the relationship between organisms and their physical environment, and development of industrial urban civilization dependent upon the consumption of fossil fuel became very problematic over the time because of the harm it caused on the environment. And this is why I think they put forward the alternative energy, and we actually have Alexandria Cortez and some progressive Democrats want to have the Green New Deal. So basically what it offers is bringing more and more regulation on the growth, on the economic growth by the federal government, and changes in the consumption patterns of the people. So it is kind of almost like counterpart of the Green Party. Party in a party, of course, because in the US we have only two parties. So basically these environmentalist movements also became quite successful in Western Europe, where they can actually got into the parliament because of their multi-party systems. Another important ideology, a challenge to liberal democracy and other ideologies as well, is feminism. So it's an ideology of psychological, political, and economic equality for women, and it was developed in 1960s and became much more of a force in 1970s in the US and Western European countries. And their main claim was that women treated as second-class citizens, and this is not acceptable. And the root problem, according to them, is psychological because of the gender roles that they are socially constructed. People are, especially men, are behaving in the way that actually women do not deserve what they actually have. And feminism has had an effect, but has not achieved all of its goals. This is why I think it's very important. Maybe we can talk about Me Too movement tomorrow. I think there are so many different waves of feminism still resonates with the society even today. And there are different versions of feminism. There is liberal feminism, radical feminism, Marxist feminism. For instance, Marxist feminists, they see the exploitation of women of being part of the capitalist system of reserve army labor. So basically this is kind of putting the women relations in its production relations context. And I just want to refer fascism as another important challenge. So fascism was a challenge, but when fascism was a challenge, the liberal democracy that we have today was not even came into existence at that time. So nationalism sometimes can grow into fascism. This is the danger that I was referring last week, as it did in Italy and Germany. And it is most of the time the emphasis is on the military, the structure, and the order. And unfortunately, the term is kind of overused or misused today. But there are definitely some characteristics of fascism. You can see those characteristics in some movements today, like white supremacy movements for sure. And finally, I want to talk about populism, which is also a very important challenge today to liberal democracy. So first of all, what is populism? Populism is different from other ideologies because it is a thin ideology. It does not necessarily have kind of this holistic approach to politics or to life. So it's kind of focuses on specific issues, and in other words, they don't necessarily have something to say about every single issue, like liberalism, socialism, and conservatism do. So the main premise of populism is they kind of divide the whole society into two groups. One is they are talking about the real people, and of course the real is in quotes here, and then versus they are talking about the corrupt elites or the political establishment. So if you frame the whole story in this perspective, of course, it is quite interesting to see that in the real world it does not necessarily exist. As I was talking about, nation last week, the people in the populist sense is also a social construction, because as I say, it's not necessarily existing. And the corrupt elite, is it possible to talk about one single group of elites who are corrupt? I don't think so, because we are talking about, especially in the US, a very pluralist group or society and their representatives. Of course, there are some corrupt politicians, but at the same time, there are some other politicians not necessarily could be probably classified in that group. So, long story short, populists are not uniters, they are dividers, and they kind of feed themselves out of this divide. They divide people, and by dividing them, they kind of create this victimhood that actually even continues when they come to power. So that's a very important question. What happens when populists come to power? Because they not necessarily come to power very often until recently, of course. I'm talking about, of course, the election of Donald Trump. So whether Donald Trump became part of this establishment or corrupt elite he was talking about before the elections. So probably his supporters will tell you that it's not the case. And on the other hand, Democrats might say otherwise. But there is one truth, that he is still playing the victim, even though he has all the power, even though he hates to be seen like powerless. So, but in this sense, playing the victim is actually making him or other populists the powerful one here. So putting the blame on the liberal media or the other, the still powerful political establishment, kind of convert people looking at the real issue here, and it kind of serves for their advantage. And finally, when we talk about populists and the rest of the ideological spectrum, we can refer to global convergence and national protectionism. What do they mean? So, despite their differences on some social policy issues, the defenders of liberal capitalist democracies developed a strong belief in globalization, free markets, free trade, benefits of immigration, the ideals of enlightenment, and the higher position of the rational human being. So they have a kind of linear reading of history with one direction to progress. However, as we discussed in the second week, as you all know now, the power relations always have the winners and losers. So every political system, whether it is the most equal system like liberal democracies kind of promise, but they probably could not deliver. So they create winners and losers. And in this case, losers of these liberal capitalist democracies found themselves on the losing side almost all the time. So which led them to question the legitimacy of the whole system, including not only the whole system, but including those inclusive values that these liberals have been defending for a long time now. This is why I think it is important to not forget that the supporters of these populist movements are most of the time anti-immigrant. They are most of the time anti-trade. We'll definitely talk more about these tomorrow during the discussion. I'm almost done with 15 minutes, so thank you so much for watching this, and hope to see you all tomorrow during the synchronous meeting. Have a nice day.